Hi, my name is Janice Switlo. I want to discuss today the importance of Crown lawyers, Department of Justice lawyers. Lawyers in general, of course, swear certain oaths, but upon joining the civil service, and in particular as a lawyer joining the civil service, you take another oath. And lawyers are considered a cornerstone in any democracy. And in the case of Canada, Crown lawyers are there serving the Crown, not necessarily the government only. Now, I can't obviously speak about anything during my tenure as in-house legal counsel for Indian Affairs as a Department of Justice Crown lawyer, but I can discuss after I left that there has been a change in policy. Now, a lawyer in general, when tasked by a client to look out for their interests, doesn't wait for the client to ask, is something wrong with this picture? Like an in-house counsel, for a business, for example. When they see that, they're responsible for assessing legal risks. When they see a risk, they're going to speak out about it. Now, you would think that the governments of Canada would be using their legal assets to the best of their ability. But as I said, the federal government, at least, has changed its policy such that Department of Justice lawyers can only respond to requests for opinions. So they cannot, to my understanding, they can no longer, if you will, act unconstrained. If they're asked an opinion, they'll render the opinion. Now, lawyers are critical to the protection of Indigenous nationals. When a lawyer, for example, is acting on a proposed lease, the lawyer has to satisfy themselves that this is in the best interest of the people as a whole, not, for example, just chief and counsel. So they need to go through that lease and ensure the terms are fair, and there's a lot of inquiry and a lot of protection, if you will, before those deals are done. Now, those leases can contain some very complicated, long-winded paragraphs that are necessary because there must be consistency. I've spoken about that before. Crown in doing anything must be consistent. So that means a lot of these leases are going to contain certain paragraphs. Now, it's one thing in that scenario where you have lawyers actually on the file and actually having fiduciary duty to comply with, to say to members, well, here's your fundamental basic terms of the lease. So what's most important? Where's the land? What's it going to be used for? How much is the rent going to be? What's the return? Is this the highest and best use? These kinds of things. Because all of the technical legal terminology is in there to give full force and effect to the deal, as those major terms define. It's a completely different situation, however, when the federal government is trying to get out from under its fiduciary duty. A trust is kind of trite. A trustee can't simply remove themselves from office. It has duties. And when the federal government's actually seeking capitulation and representations to say that, you never were nations, these aren't really treaties, we don't care about those, we're always been under Canada, and this is really where we want to be. These are significant, these are surrender kinds of issues. Surrender in a whole sense, not the surrender in the sense of what has transpired with treaties. In that case, are the Department of Justice lawyers in the picture? I don't think so. I think it's only the ministerial departments. Now we have Service Canada and we have the other. I believe the Department of Justice lawyers are cut out and prevented by that change of policy from speaking up to say things that I'm saying. For example, there is a Crown duty of fairness. We already have treaties. We're bound by those treaties. By the way, there's a J treaty that we still need to comply with. And other examples of where Canada is acting as an outlaw nation. If the Department of Justice lawyers remained fully empowered, they would be acting to ensure that Canadian governments, especially the federal government, is on track and on path and acting lawfully and not as an outlaw nation. So because of this concept, of a constitutional monarchy, whereby the Queen is bound to listen to the advice and act on the advice of her Privy Council members, for example, the Prime Minister. In that case, she's also expecting that her Crown lawyers are eyeballing everything that's going on. That protective measure, that check and balance on the power of our governments is fully functioning. I don't believe it is anymore. I believe that frustrated with Department of Justice interfering from the perspective of Minister of Indian Affairs, for example, as it then was, that getting fed up with that, they bound their lawyers, they gagged their lawyers, and the lawyers are no longer free to step in and do the duty that they're sworn to do. Maybe that's why some of these oaths that the lawyers are swearing are being changed to relieve them of that duty. As I mentioned in a previous episode, the oath, for example, in BC being changed. So why is this important for Indigenous nationals? Well, recall, and you'll hear a lot of people speaking about this, that the Crown represented, you will have your lawyers. Those are to be the Department of Justice lawyers looking out for your interests, protecting and ensuring that deals being done, the administration that you agreed to under treaty is properly executed and not being used to affect a termination of you so as to ensure the fall of the treaties as you fall as a nation. Those lawyers are not functioning, to my information, and that's something that needs to be addressed. And I put it to the lawyers, where are your responsibilities? A Crown lawyer is not like a business lawyer that only responds when the client says, okay, I'm going to pay you to support this position in this argument. Give me your best because this is what I want to do. This is not our situation. We have a Crown. We have constitutional responsibilities. We swear an oath, some of us older ones. We have sworn an oath certainly to protect the interests of the Crown, and that means to protect the interests of the Indigenous nationals as well. Where are those lawyers for these Indigenous nations? That's the big question. That's all I have to say.